let's look at this. And this is perfectly exactly the effect that I was gonna go for. This is so nice. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our mini series on integrating colorful SVG map into our website. So this is the map that we've been looking at. Just as a quick reminder, our main challenge was to first of all export a clean SVG from Figma. As I said before, Figma is actually very good at exporting marked up SVGs. So sometimes back then in Illustrator days, for example, the output that Illustrator would create from a vector graphic into SVG, the SVG was just, it was fine, but it was not great. Figma is a lot better, but we looked at how layer naming and export options influence the output that you get from Figma. And this is what we ended up with. Our biggest challenge was to recreate this blur effect that we can see right here on those names here and here, that the lines that go behind these little bubbles, that they get blurred. So today we have basically the same thing to do, but like with the circle elements. And since they face the same limitation of that this effect with in CSS, it's called backdrop filter, which just doesn't really exist in SVGs. We will continue with our SVG and HTML CSS hybrid solution to this problem. So let's jump into the code and remind ourselves what we did. This is where the SVG starts. And what we did last week was to take out the text elements of the SVG and actually put them in plain HTML. So that's what we're doing. We just wrapped this entire SVG in a figure element and created the individual region names as spans that we're now positioning absolutely on top of the map. Then, because we're now in CSS land, so to say, we can apply the backdrop filter blur option to those elements, and we can style them in regular HTML way. The only issue that we had that in this design, we coincidentally could solve through how borders work, is that these original graphics, they actually have like in Figma, when we check it out in Figma, then we can see that these elements, also just as a reminder, we talked about this in the other video. So if you didn't see that one, feel free to look at that one first. It's linked up in the description too. When we look at the stroke over here, that has a linear gradient applied, right? So this controls how much border we see on this element. And now that we had to move to CSS to get the backdrop filter, we actually have something that is possible in SVG, which is to have, like, remember the circles are still SVGs. So we can see that those circles, they have the gradient on the border. And that is something that is possible in CSS, but not with rounded corners. So with border radius applied, as soon as you have an HTML element that has a border radius applied and a border image, which is then a linear gradient, then those two things don't mix. Then the browser says, no, I'm gonna show you your gradient border, but I'm gonna make the corners pointy. And that's what you get. And so what we did here now is that we just applied a regular black border to this, but we're saying that the border bottom of this, so let's look at this in the inspector actually. If we check this out, let's check out this box. Let's, like zoom into all of this a little bit. We can see that we do have a border width of 1 pixel, but we also have a border bottom width of 0 pixels. And since we have a border radius of almost 10,000 pixels applied here just to make sure that it's really rounded in all of the scenarios. What CSS does then is to almost accidentally, in our case, display the border in a way that it fades out while it comes around the borders, the border radii, the corner radius, which is exactly what we want. What we're going to jump into now is to recreate these little circles. And so the black dots right here, we could leave them in the SVG just because they're not a problem in itself. But then we might end up having positioning issues. So let's not do that. And let's recreate those circles in HTML as well, the same we did with the text. So I know this sounds a little bit wild and is probably a little bit unusual, but I don't care. We're still doing it because we want the map and we want it to be tidy. And so let's go for it. So one thing I want to point out is that I cleaned up the graphic before starting the recording on this here. But the only thing that I did is that those lines that we can see here in the design, they didn't really end up in the center of each circle, which actually didn't really matter because you didn't see the end of the lines. But I don't like stuff like that. So I just cleaned up a little bit. Before we recreate those circles, since we know that we're recreating this backdrop blur through HTML elements, here we can see that we have a whole lot of definitions for filters that we're actually not using anymore. Like even this one, we can just get rid of that because this was a test that we're not using. So let's actually look into each of those. You know what? I think we can actually maybe shortcut this a little bit. And let's check the last one because they all seem to do a similar thing. They're like the redefinition of this effect just for every individual element. So I would say we can get rid of all of them, hit save, and see that this only affected the circles now. Because what happened here is that there's actually 3 circles in place. There's one in the background, then there's the one with the border, and there's the centerpiece one. And the one that it was all the way in the back, that was actually, that had like a Gaussian blur applied to it, so it would glow out like that. Also here, this is something that would actually be better to do in SVG. Like I'm not advocating for recreating graphics in CSS, just to make this clear generally. It's just like in this case, with this specific effect that we're striving for here, and since backdrop filter is only possible in CSS at the moment, also, just to make that clear, I know you can apply CSS in SVG, but specifically backdrop filter blur does not work on individual SVG elements the same way it does on HTML elements. So we deleted all of our filters. Let's see, now we have a whole bunch of gradients defined here. I believe that a whole bunch of them are gradients for the lines in the background that we probably shouldn't delete. So let's look at those connection lines. We have them right here. And we have like all of that stuff going on here. Let's crack that open and see what we're working with. Because also here, I believe that we can clean up this SVG quite a bit. Also through integrated CSS right here. So what we can see is that they have gradients applied here. Right, so paint 0 linear 1,4. Now that's a great name. And not all lines have a gradient applied, so that's also fine. Let's jump to the definition of this gradient. So let's jump down here and see. Okay, so we have a gradient that's here. Now we sort of have the same gradient but with different coordinates. So, okay, so we're not going to get into this. Like we could probably optimize this and like reuse the gradients on different elements, but we're not going to do that. But what we can do actually is that all of them have the same stroke width and line cap property applied. That is something that we can make a little bit prettier. So we'll just copy this to our clipboard for now. And now I think we can just select all of this stuff and get rid of it. Like just like that. So now the lines will fall back to a 1 pixel width, and they also won't have rounded corners at the end anymore. But that is something that we actually don't need because all of the lines just end behind those circles. And I actually like that the lines are a little bit more visible here. So this is like a nice cleanup. Gradient definitions, paint 1 all the way through paint 7. They are actually in use. So let's open these up. Paint 3 linear, paint 4, paint 5, paint 6, paint 7. Awesome. So what do we have here? Paint 8. And where is this used? Aha, this is not used anymore. So we can just get rid of that. Let's check out the next one. I'm just like copying the name and I'm dumping it into the search function right here just to see if there's more than one result. And if there is not, then this is not in use. Same here. So all of them don't seem to be used. I'm just going to take like a little leap of faith here. We'll delete all of them. That is actually fine because we are going to replace all of that stuff except for the lines and for the dots here with HTML. So this is pretty cool. Let's fold all of this up again just to see if we actually doing a good job here. So map, we're going to need the connection lines. We're going to need the decoration dots, but we're not going to need those 5 things in the middle here. So we can get rid of them. They're gone and we can see this is the remainder of our SVG graphic now, and that's fine. Let's recreate them. Let's recreate just one, and then we can copy paste them. Since we're now recreating the dots for the regions, that should actually correlate with the position of the text. We can actually position them all together. And so to do that, I would argue that if we wrapped this thing in a div and do that, and then we get like put a class on the div and we move only the positioning part onto the div, this is still in the same place, which is cool. But now we can just add like another thing here and say, hola. And then this is going to be in the same place. So as a little reminder, those things are stacked on top of each other. And they only differ in size a little bit. It seems like there's 2 that have the same smaller size and 2 with the same bigger size. So let's first get one of them going. And we might not even need an extra element here. And we can go with pseudo elements like before and after ones, so we don't actually pollute the DOM with too much stuff. You know what, just to make this a little bit cleaner, I think we're actually going to add like a little empty element in here that will just be empty. And we'll add like a little class on here. And so with this, let's give it a border. We want a border. We want it to be rounded full. We actually want this to be, I should be writing into the classes. We actually want this to have the same aspect ratio. So we're going to give it a square. Let's see what's happening. Okay. So one thing that we're going to do on here is that we're going to say display grid, gonna give it like a little bit of a gap, and we're also gonna say justify items center. So we can see that this jumps down there. Now this needs a little bit of a width that I will probably define through text size. So in relation to the text size, let's see what's like, we're gonna use a flexible unit here. So this is 2 M's, which is actually not too bad. Like, let's see, like if we just, yeah, and this grows, which is cool. So this one now, they all have, they don't have the, so we're setting a border, and to achieve the same effect as we have on the text nodes where we have the gradient on the border, we can now say border left, border L 0. And yeah, so this is also fading out to the side now. What we need now is the white background to blur in the same fashion as the text element did. So we can just snag our code from here. BG white, 20% opacity. This is very, very cool. I wonder why this line is on top now. What if we increase the Z index? No, that is not it. Oh, I see. I think we didn't apply the background blur yet. I'm pretty sure it's actually behind. Just that we didn't apply the blur, so let's do that. And yeah, okay, so whew. Short moment of panic, but we have it here now. This is a very nice circle. And since we're here, we can also now just apply like a smooth shadow to it to replicate the effect that we had on the graphic itself. If you remember that these, if we look at this in the design, let's zoom in to just make this super clear. Like this one here, there's like this very big blurry background, and we're going to do the same thing over here with our shadow. So let's have like a custom definition. We want this to be in the 0 position, 0x, 0y. And now we want this to spread out like maybe 5M. And then we want this to be probably something like RGBA 000, then 0.2. Oof, 0.8. Ooh, yeah, now we can see it. So I would argue that that's too strong. Yeah, let's go with the 0.5. I think that's actually pretty cool. And now the only thing missing is the center black dot. For this, we will use our pseudo element. And to get that positioned in the center of the circle, we'll actually give our circle element also a class of grid, and we'll say to place all of their contents in the center. So we can now use the pseudo selector just like that, and repeat a couple things. So we're going to say aspect square, going to say before BG midnight. We also want the before element to be rounded full. Let's save this. And so now it's not showing up, but that's because it doesn't have a size yet. So if we say width, and then tell it like to be 1M, then we have our circle dead center in the middle of this element, which is, I think, very close to the original design. If we look at this side by side, then this is really not too bad. It's, yeah, we're even at the right zoom level. So this element can even be a little bit smaller and a little bit more transparent even. So maybe this backdrop is more like a 10 or a 5. Yeah, I think that's fine. And it can be a little bit smaller after all. So this can just be like this maybe. And I think it would be interesting if we can see, we can try to get the black dot to maybe be like 50% of its parent element. That doesn't seem to work for some reason. Let's see why. Let's see why. Here's the before element. So it's not getting a size now. That's a bit of a head scratcher, but doesn't matter. We'll just go back to our 1M solution. Now we can totally just copy this pattern to our other elements here. And I think the easiest way to do that is to actually just grab this whole thing and copy paste that 5 times. Or 4 times actually, because for the center, for the Germany location, we want this other bigger element, this green one here. We're just gonna copy this 4 times, and we're gonna grab the positioning from the elements that we can then delete. So let's, hold on. I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit and just caught in my own thoughts. So we can copy this and then get rid of that one and replace this here with what I just copied. So yeah, so we have the South Africa dot going on. And now we just have overlapping things because they all have the same style. Okay, so let's repeat this. It's get Spain. We actually just need the left and the top, so we can just get rid of that stuff. Then we're gonna replace those things over here. And last one, Estonia. Estonia goes here. Have the positioning stuff. Update the positioning here. Delete Estonia. And now we have all of those dots beautifully in place. I think the original design said that Estonia and Spain is a little bit bigger. So let's do that as well. We're just going to go in here, bump up the size for Estonia and Spain, just like that, just like this. And now the dots are a bit bigger. And remember to also select, oops, sorry, the center dot and make that a bit bigger too. Maybe a little bit smaller, really. Yeah, so this is very cool. All of the elements are back. I feel like South Africa can actually move a little bit to the left. Let's move our window over here. So South Africa, where are you? Let's move you a little bit over. Maybe even a little bit just like that. And this is super, super awesome. I love how flexible this is, how everything is scaling down. What I don't love so much is that these dots are staying relatively big compared to the text. So I think since we're defining M's, we can fix this relatively easy. Let's try this on the Spain one. So remember how we're defining the text size on each of the text elements. I believe that we should be able to actually select all of them, delete that on those, so the text is going to increase. And now we can just define the text size. I think we want the same font size on all of them, so we can maybe just even put it here. And with this, the text, like the size of the circles, changes as well, because remember that for the circles, we're using the M notation for the width. And this, the EM notation, picks up the font size from the parent element. So this is now the over next parent element, but this is cascading down. So this is referencing this. Now we can just select those, and I think now that it's relating to the font size, we can bump them all up a little bit in size, make this like a 2.5 and a 3. So now they're all a little bit bigger and they all shrink down proportionally to the font size. And I think that's just awesome. Like this looks really great. The last thing we got to do is to do this for the Germany label too. Let's remind ourselves of the design. So here we actually have a couple layers more. So we have 3 of the circles stacked on top of each other, and we have like this centerpiece. Plus we have the background blur. I think to get started, we can actually leverage on the ones that we already have here. Let's just update that with the Germany one, just like this. And also as well, again, grab the positioning from Germany. And now we can get this out. So now that we have the circle going on, first of all, the label for Germany is below the circle. So we can flop this around. Since this is grid, we can just switch the order, which is also very nice. I think let's close down the ones that we don't need so we don't have so much visual clutter going on. So we're working on the Germany one right here. Let's close down the SVG as well. Right on. So this can be positioned a lot higher now, I would say. So this is maybe even a 40. Ooh, 45. Yeah, perfect. Dead center. Awesome. First of all, let's get the color right, just to know what we're working with. So this one has this funky green color going on the border. Let's grab the value for that. We want this to come in here. So this is on that one. Let's check the stroke width as well. Is this, 1.3. Well, we have high-res displays, so why not bump up the border a little bit with a funny value. So, I think this might not be right. So now this is resetting the, you know what, let's not worry about this. We'll just stick with the regular border and have the color apply. Cool. So now our center dot here is not just midnight anymore, but this is actually like a gradient. Gradient to bottom before, and then you say from, I'm wondering if we have that color in here. No, this is not part of the design system. So from, let's just grab the colors manually. We have this is the bottom color actually. And I'm just going to grab both. So we got our from this value to that value. So we got our dot in the center going on. Very, very nice. And so now the hot trick that I had imagined was if we maybe not set a width on here, but just like apply a padding, then the padding is defining the circle size. And if we now kind of stack these elements inside of each other and remove the the pseudo element here because we actually don't want it on the outer circles. Yeah. Then you can see what's happening. Then now the circles are starting to stack in, and the border, the padding is defining the, the concentric circles growing out of each other. So the only thing we have to make sure now is that we only have the shadow on the outermost one. So we can already get rid of it in the central one. So that looks a lot better. And now we can just kind of copy this again. Really? Inside of that one. We're getting like a real nested doll situation going on here. So we'll also delete, no, from the outer one, we'll delete the pseudo element, which is the center dot. We don't need it. We'll just get rid of it. So we have our circles stacking up just like that, which is really, really nice. I do think that the background is too dark now. We actually just have this one shadow going on, but it's just too strong, like because it's so big probably. Let's tone this down a lot more, like down to a 2 maybe or something. And then let's check the graphic. Oh, it's also, they have like a background. Ah, no, this is green. The green is shining through because of the outermost circle. This is not black. Like the shadow of this is not black, but this is actually also not just one color. But this is actually, if we look at it closely, and we can see up top it's green and below it's bluish. So I think we can actually not solve this with the shadow at all. What we need is a dedicated element behind this that has a gradient from top to bottom, same as the center tiny circle, but much bigger, rounded, and Gaussian blur this. Are you ready? Let's try. But let's look at what we have for a second. So we have 3 of these elements stacked inside of each other, which make up these circles. First of all, I think compared to our original graphic, the dot appears a little bit too small. So all of this has to be almost double the size. The Germany label needs the midnight background color too. Let's fix all of that now. So this can be rounded. It doesn't actually need a border. The background is not 20% white, but it's what we call midnight. And the text should be white so we can read it. Perfect. This is cool. We don't need the backdrop blur on that one. Nice. Then for all of our circles, I think we can bump up the padding to something a little bit bigger. Yeah, maybe actually the padding too. And the center circle has to be a little bit bigger as well, just like that. Now the positioning is off, of course. So now I believe what we should be doing is that let's see if this is actually exactly in the middle. Okay, no, it's not. Oops, sorry. It's not exactly in the middle, but since this element is so huge, we have to make sure that it stays center or stays in its position when we resize the map. Let's see if it does that. Like if I just use regular percentages here, 39, and it can be 40 from the top, 38 from the 35 from the top. Perfecto. Does it stay in place? Oh, it does stay in place. How cool is that? That's pretty cool. Well, the lines move over a little bit, but that's fine. I think that doesn't have like a huge visual impact. So the only thing we're missing now, I think, is the background, the colorful background. For this, we will use another pseudo element. This is going to be absolutely positioned behind the last circle. Definitely need a position relative on this. And now we can just use our before again, just like we did. Actually, you know what? We can actually grab a lot of this pseudo styles from our center dot, only that it has to be much bigger. So let's grab these styles and put them on this element here. So now this is going to do that. Yeah, that's sort of expected behavior. What we got to do is to position this absolutely. We're going to say inset 0. That means that it's top, right, bottom, left, all 0, which if we don't give it a width, should hopefully mean that it's going to overlay the entire element. Let's see what it does. We don't even need the aspect square. Perfect. This is exactly what we wanted. Now let's see if we can blur it. So before and now blur. We want to blur it a lot. Like let's start large. That's pretty good. Maybe even like, what's the biggest blur? Yeah. This is very, very, very cool. Only that I want to switch these around because I believe the blue is the bottom color here, and this is the from. So we're kind of going from green to blue. Very nice. Now, the only thing is that this is in front of the circles. Let's see what happens if we give it a negative Z index. So before minus Z10. Now this might actually be working. I'm just going to give our outermost element an isolation thing, so we can make sure that this is not like our pseudo element of this I element is not going outside of this div regarding the stacking context. But I think it's just a little bit like, let's compare the graphics. It's just like the element is just too visible. Okay, so maybe the before actually has to be a little bit transparent just to take it back a little bit. Yeah, I think this is better. Maybe a little bit less actually, 85. And now the white background on our outermost circle has to be increased a bit more, just to, to set it off the background a bit better. Yeah, I think we're getting there. This one, 2. Yes. 50 is too much. 40 is good. And now the innermost one. Well, so they all stack on top of each other. The innermost one maybe doesn't even need a background at all. Okay, this one can even go back a little bit. So these parts, I think here you can just experiment with what you think looks good. I think I'm starting to be really happy with the outcome of this. I'm just going to make this a little bit whiter again. And I think I'm going to remove the blur from those elements. Aha, because that also takes an effect. Yeah, so with this, all of those things work in conjunction, right? So with this, I think on the innermost one, we can get back our background color a little bit. and take it down to a 20. This can also be back to a 20 maybe. And the inner one can just be bumped up a little bit. So actually take it back and reduce the opacity quite a bit on the blurry one. Yes, I think this is going in the right direction. 65. Perfect. So sometimes you just gotta fiddle with the knobs that you have a bit. Here we are. This is our final result for getting the effect back onto the circles. Let's check this out. Like here, also the centerpiece sizes down beautifully. I believe this is really, really, really cool. Again, I know we're building sort of a little bit of an HTML SVG Frankenstein, but as UI designers, I think here it's our job to get to the solution as close as possible. And I'm starting to be really happy with this. Let's look at our code now. So up here, we have all of the text labels together with our circles. We're applying all of that stuff through Tailwind. I would say there's a lot of repeating classes here. If you wanted, you can just turn these bits and bobs here into a component and just override the positioning of the individual elements. If you really wanted to take this home, I'm just not going to do that now because it's not like a reusable component or anything. But since this is a Svelte component, or you might do this as a React component, I guess, whatever you have, I'm just going to leave it like that because I think this is quite readable. And I'm very happy with the outcome. With this, the next thing that we're going to move into is to animate the drawing of those lines. That is our next step. Let's see how we can do that. We have that effect on the Dinghy website already. If we jump over to our homepage for a second, we can see that there's a path that's been drawn around the word happen. So let's go and steal that animation from there. Let's look how that is done. Let's jump into the stage component. Is this the stage component? No, this is the homepage. Oh, it's the fancy hover headline, of course. And so fancy strong. Yeah, this is the SVG part. And here we can see we have keyframes that we call draw, and we're animating those values, stroke dash array and stroke dash offset. In the first video, I promised you that even though this is probably a very well-known technique, I want to emphasize an important part that I think not everybody knows, because when I was Googling all of this, there was like still a lot of JavaScript involved, and I'm gonna show you why. So let's bring this back. Let's go back to our page. So I'm copying this sort of stuff right here. Okay, just like that. Really? We can actually just get this style tag and apply that right into the SVG. So we're just going to check this in right now here. And now we have this class going on here for the lines that we want to animate. In our case, we can do this a little bit simpler and say connection lines and then path, exactly, Copilot, because remember we have this group going on here that we gave the ID of connection lines. In there's a whole bunch of paths. All right, so let's just YOLO style hit save and see what happens. Interesting. So now all of the paths are sort of dashed. Let's maybe play with these values a bit. What happens if we set this to 100? Now, they were longer for a little while, and now they're gone again. Interesting. So what's going on here? If we look at this graphic, I think it's pretty apparent that the lines, the individual lines we have on the map, they all have a different length, right? Like this one going all the way down around here, that is a lot longer than this one. And the way that this stuff works is that you have to tell it in these line length units, how far is the effect going to travel on the path that you have. And usually, like most of when you Google how to animate the line drawing of an SVG, most of the solutions that will come up involve a little bit of JavaScript that measures the length of the actual path. So you don't have to magic number this thing. So what I want to say is like, let's set this to 100 and see if we can actually get this to work the way that, like the regular manual way. So see, these are drawing now, but we can just make our lives a lot easier if we set this back to 1 and 1, go into the paths, like all of these ones, like let's open all of that stuff up and let's apply a very, to me, very magic attribute that I sort of stumbled upon by accident. And that is, we're just going to select all of these and going to go multi-cursor party here. And now we're just going to say path length 1. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And with this, the lines are already magically drawing. Isn't that super cool? So what we're doing here, instead of measuring the actual length of the path with JavaScript, and you can do all that, and it's also not horrible for performance or whatever, but you actually don't need this because you can just go into the SVG and tell it to sort of call the length of this path 1 for the SVG and for the CSS animation. So now that we're sort of saying, look, we're just going to pretend this path is the length of 1 unit, whatever the unit is, like, don't worry about it. The path is just virtually renamed, mapped to a length of 1. And now our animation can run from 1 to 0 perfectly fine. And come out like that. Let's just reload. Let's look at this. And this is perfectly exactly the effect that I was gonna go for. This is so nice. This also, of course, this also works when you resize this, like zoom, all of the regions are connecting beautifully. And so I think this is a really, really cool trick that you can also apply whenever you use this drawing of lines trick right here. So the only thing that I want to do on top of this now, but we're going to do that in the third episode because this one is becoming relatively long already, is that we're going to parallax animate these little dots a little bit. So when you scroll, that they move in different speeds. And also I want to, like originally this graphic is like, I just uncommented all of the content from this page. Like, let me show you what I mean. Let's close all of that stuff down, but this is our about page. And so I just commented all of the other sections. Let's get them back in the team section too, right? Like, so this is not at the top, like this is at the top. And I want to be sure that the drawing of the lines occurs when this element comes into view, right? So next episode, use the intersection observer API to start the effect as soon as this element is scrolled into view. And also apply the parallax scrolling effect. I have a couple nifty ideas for that. I hope that we might be able to do this without JavaScript. I can't promise this yet. But stay tuned for the next one if you want to follow along on this rabbit hole of an issue. But I think it's a real life problem. And as front-end developers, this is what we got to do, right? Be creative, find a solution. And yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for tagging along. Please let me know if you have any questions, if I was rambling on too much. Please let me know what you think, and see you in the next and last episode of this mini series. Thanks.